Okay, we're looking at caucuses. Caucuses are one of the two methods of selecting presidential candidates in the primary season. Obviously, the other method is primaries, which works like a normal election. But for this lesson, what you need to understand is what a caucus is and how it works, and then you need to be able to criticize it. So what is a caucus? This first article from Fox News has a nice video on it, and we'll just have a look at that to start us off.
Ago. Now less than 10 hours to go. We've got 9 hours and 29 minutes about before they start caucusing. Let's take a look now at Point of Grace Church in Waukee, Iowa. Isn't that pretty? Caucus is going to be held there tonight. It's going to be a busy place, and Shannon Bream is live there telling us a little bit about how all of this works for folks who are not from Iowa. Good morning, Shannon.
Hi, Martha. Check out this church. I mean, isn't it beautiful? It seats more than 900 people. They expect actually probably about 1,000 folks here tonight, Martha.
So tell us a little bit about how it will work, Shannon.
Well, if you show up here tonight and you want to vote, there are two things that you've got to qualify with. First of all, you have to be 18 on or by the presidential election November 6th. And secondly, you've got to be a registered Republican. But here's where it gets a little bit interesting, because no matter what you are right now in your home sitting there in Iowa, tonight you can show up and register as a Republican on site if you've got the right precinct, you've got the right ID, and within minutes you could be voting. Here's how it all works. It kicks off at 7 o'clock Central Time, local time here. And if there are surrogates on site for the different candidates, they can give a quick speech, something like 3 to 5 minutes to put in that last plea for votes. Everybody gets a piece of paper. You either check off the name or write down the candidate's name, the one you want to see as the GOP nominee. The votes are tallied right here on site. They're announced to the caucus goers. Then they're put on an official form and taken to the Iowa GOP. They aggregate all the totals and make the official final count. Local party officials say there is no other experience like an Iowa caucus.
So I think the fact that, they get the opportunity to see and talk with their neighbors, see who they're leaning toward, talk about why, and then hear that closing argument, that's totally different than a normal primary experience that someone would have. And so I think that's what makes it unique. And especially this time around, it's kind of up for grabs going into the last day.
And truly, there are so many undecideds. We've heard these numbers about people not really sure who they're going to go for, or at least willing to change their minds when they go to caucuses. I have talked.
So this is really important. You can see here that about 1,000 people are going to turn up to the precinct in Waukee, Iowa, and crucially they're going to get to persuade each other to change their minds. Now that's different from a primary, because at a primary you go in, you vote, and you go out. Whereas in a caucus, there is an opportunity to persuade other caucus goers to change their mind. This means that a candidate that can mobilize voters to go to the caucus is going to have an advantage, because they're going to persuade other caucus goers to change their mind. So you can see here a caucus is a slightly more consensual, a slightly more civic-based moment where the state is broken down into small precincts, and each precinct holds one of these meetings. Okay, this article takes it into a little more detail for you. Again, if you have a look here, I would pause it now and just take down some key notes on the difference between caucuses and primaries. And again, if we have a look here at a caucus, members of political party meet in person, and again it says that there's going to be an advantage for candidates that can get their voters to the caucus, because you can discuss, it says here, you can discuss the candidates and debate their merits. The caucus system was the original way in which political parties chose candidates, but people began to feel that the secret ballot was fairer, more democratic system. But having said that, you could argue that engaging with other voters and talking about the candidate is good for democracy, because you get to hammer out the issues and persuade each other. So if you want to read this article in full, I would go back to the actual external Storify link. But key thing there that you understand the difference between a caucus and a primary. Now, this video shows the specifics of how the Iowa caucus works, and it's worth watching this just to get an idea of how it goes.
Hey, what's what's going on, everybody? It's Jacob Soborow for Why Tuesday coming to you today from my house in California. But we're not going to be here for all that long because we're cruising off to Iowa at the end of the week to try and catch up with all of the presidential candidates who have not yet responded to the Why Tuesday Candidate Challenge. That was our challenge to all of them to lay out their plan in a video response so you guys can all see it for making America's voting system more secure, more reliable, and more accessible. We're going to Iowa because that's where the candidates are going to be, probably, because that's where the Iowa Caucus happens, which is the first presidential nominating process in the entire U.S. That's why we always see presidential candidates making their case to Iowans so often about why they should be the next president of the United States. If you're not from Iowa like me, you probably don't know much about what the caucus system is all about. So we thought in this week's episode of Why Tuesday we would kind of run through it here and explain it to you. The caucus system is unique and different from the traditional primary system that you see in states like New Hampshire. Community members are going to gather at local schools and churches and other meeting places to support their favorite candidate, and the format of the event depends on which political party is running the caucus. Iowa is divided into counties, and those counties are divided into precincts. Each precinct has a set number of delegates to assign, so we're going to say our example precinct has 6 delegates. To keep things simple, we're going to say we only have 10 caucus goers in our precinct, but in reality, you could have 100 or 500 caucus goers in a precinct, but you still only have a fixed number of delegates, and the math would be the same. For the Republicans, the process is pretty straightforward. You come in, you vote, usually through a secret ballot, and the percentages of the group supporting each candidate decides what delegates will go on to the county convention. The Democratic Party process is a bit more complicated. So let's say you have 6 candidates running for the Democratic nomination. In some cases, the first step is that supporters make their pitch to the other caucus goers for their favorite candidate. At the very least, the campaigns will be putting stickers on their supporters' shirts and pointing them in the right direction as they enter the caucus site. Next, caucus goers indicate their support for a particular candidate by standing in a designated area, forming what's known as a preference group. There may even be an area for undecided participants. Each group's counted and a percentage of support is calculated. Now here's a unique feature to the caucus. At this point, the caucus officials determine which candidates are viable. Depending on the number of county delegates to be elected, the viability threshold can be anywhere from 15 to 25% of attendees. For our example, any candidate polling less than 15% is declared unviable, and those persons must realign to a viable candidate or declare that they are undecided. Then, participants try and convince their neighbors to support their candidates. Each preference group might informally deputize a few members to recruit supporters from the other groups, and in particular from among those undecided. Undecided participants might visit each preference group to ask its members about their candidate.
So as you can see, in this system, it's much different from a primary in that you get to persuade each other to change your mind. Now, with this in mind, we now need to look at why this system can be criticised. Obviously that there are advantages in terms of democracy, but why can caucuses be criticised as a method of presidential selection? So the first major criticism of this is the Arcane and Scattered process. Have a look at this video.
We are just 2 days from the third nominating contest of the election season, and we still do not know for sure who won the first one. Or do we? Correspondent Steve Brown reports on today's news about the Iowa caucuses.
Guess what? We defeated Mitt Romney in Iowa. Today, Rick Santorum declared caucus victory, and Iowa's Republican Party chairman did confirm the math.
There's no question among those precincts we're able to certify, Rick Santorum received more votes on caucus night.
But in the eye of the Iowa GOP, it is a split decision because while Santorum now holds a slim 34-vote edge over Mitt Romney, votes from 8 precincts were not counted because official paperwork was not turned in before yesterday's deadline.
Each of our 1,774 precincts received what is called a Form E certification form.
Right, hang on a minute. 1,774 precincts. Are you kidding me? It's no wonder that 8 precincts went missing because they didn't fill out their e-forms. You see what we're trying to say here? This process is incredibly difficult to administer. And in 2012, there was a horrible mix-up where 8 precincts weren't counted, there was a recount. Mitt Romney was declared the winner on caucus night, but then on the recount, it was clear that Rick Santorum had won, and then in the panic and confusion, they effectively split the delegates 50-50. This is not an acceptable situation, and it's not adequate. And it's caused by the fact that Iowa is split into 1,774 districts. Imagine the process that we've just talked about above happening concurrently in 1,774 different precincts. It's a very, very difficult and complicated thing to organise.
And that document is signed by the precinct chair and is signed by the precinct secretary, and then it is delivered to the county chairman.
And of the 8 precincts without certification paperwork, 4 are in Lee County in southeastern Iowa, where the local chairman says those results were electronically turned in on caucus night, but not the forms.
They did not fill out their E-forms. The E-forms were actually a waste of paper.
But the rules say no paperwork, no votes, and so Santorum leads and is not declared the winner. The Romney campaign, in a news release, called it a virtual tie. A disappointment is what some political observers call it.
Most people are cynical about politics anyway. When they see something like this, the results changing weeks afterward with 8 missing precincts, a lot of people ask questions.
And today, Romney called Santorum to offer congratulations for the Iowa vote. Santorum took that as a concession, but the Romney campaign insists it was not. So they...
Okay, I think we can take a good criticism out of that. So, moving on, there's also the issue that this is very difficult to understand, and the impact of that is that the turnout is very low. Have a look at this article, and really we're only focusing, we've already looked at this muck-up with who won because of the lost precincts, so that's this bit here. But if we move down to the key point, here we get our news article sifting skills. We don't want that. You can see here that the turnout at the Iowa caucus in 2012 was a record high of 5.4%. That is a massive problem. Now, if we look at the 2 candidates who've come first and second, we have Mitt Romney, who is a moderate and more centrist Republican, much more likely to do well in the real thing. And we've got Rick Santorum, who is a slightly extreme Christian candidate who, if he went forward against Barack Obama, would invariably lose. But the fact that the turnout is so very low means that the people who are going to the caucus are going to be much more politically extreme. Added to this, the fact that at a caucus they're allowed to persuade each other, if we move down to the next point, this means that the party activists and committed followers can persuade other caucus goers to change their mind at the actual caucus. So caucuses not only have low turnout, but they favour extreme candidates because you can get other caucus goers to change their mind if you make a good enough persuasion. That's part of the reason why Ron Paul did so well in 2012, because he had a very hardline committed group of young voters who enthusiastically went and got other voters to support him in the caucus. You can see here that Santorum's message is incredibly vague.
Rick Santorum is going to say, no, the economy is not the main issue. Freedom is. Oh, this is awesome. Let's watch.
I've said throughout the course of this campaign that while other issues are certainly important, the economy, joblessness, national security concerns, the family, the issue of life, all of these issues are important. But the foundational issue in this race, the one that is in fact the cause of the other maladies that we are feeling, whether it's in the economy, or whether it's in the budget crisis that we're dealing with, all boils down to one word. And that's what's at stake in this election, and it's right behind me on that banner, and that's the word freedom. I was pleased to hear before I came out that Governor Romney is now adopting that theme as his speech tonight.
Okay, you can see the pretty vague and generalised message that Santorum is sending to these extreme voters, but the caucus is going to favour candidates like that. And the theme is 3. Yeah, ignore the subtitles. We're talking about freedom. And finally, the massive importance that is put onto getting your voters to the caucus